Let's turn the corner now in our morning, and I mentioned earlier as we started the day that one of the most important areas to watch in connected cars, certainly in terms of infotainment, is this area of Apple's CarPlay, but also, very critically, Google's Android Auto, which is the incursion of the world's largest mobile platform into the dashboard. Remember the concept, playing the hits of mobile from the most popular mobile platform out there into the vehicle's dash in a way that is relevant, that has muscle memory, has connected links to what you already do with Android outside the car. So we've got two experts who are in the trenches actually building the look and feel, the actual hands-on experience that consumers encounter when they buy one of the emerging vehicles that are out there. Fair number of models already that have Android Auto. So please welcome from Google's Android team, Harry Newton-Dunn and Evan Malahy.
Hi, my name is Henry Newton-Dunn.
And I'm Evan Malahy, and we're from the Android Auto design team at Google.
And today we're both design leads on the Android Auto team. And today we're going to talk about design thinking for a platform and its implications.
And for those of you not familiar with Android Auto, even after the great introduction, it's sort of Android's expression of its operating system in the car in an appropriate way that's been sort of reimagined for the driving context, which is obviously very different than mobile devices.
Yeah, and given today's audience, I'm sure I don't need to remind anyone that you simply just plug your phone into your Android Auto kind of enabled car just via USB, and that basically just locks out your phone and presents a auto or driving ready kind of UI in the car.
And before we talk too much about automotive, we have to step back and talk a little bit more about Android, which started as an open source operating system for mobile, as we all know, but has really reached sort of and become a platform at scale. It's got over 1 billion users. It has global reach. It's on a vast number of cell phones worldwide. And what's really interesting about that and sort of humbling is seeing what other people have taken our platform and extended it into and built industries and solutions on top of that we could have never imagined. And we think that's really at the heart and the DNA of Android as an ecosystem, and very exciting for us.
And also, one of the other things that's really exciting about working on Android is that we're diversifying, right? So we started on mobile phones, and obviously, as we're here today, we're moving into the automotive space. And we also have solutions for TV, and we also have solutions for wearable devices, or Wear, Android Wear, the watch-based thing that we can see up there.
And anytime you talk about automotive and mobile technologies or digital ecosystems, you really have to talk about distraction. And as phones demand more and more attention, they're more immersive, they ding more and more, and they draw us into that world. And we're stuck in traffic, we're bored, and that becomes a dangerous temptation to think about those two worlds coming together. And we all know the stats, and so that's fundamental to how we think about moving into this space, is really thinking deeply about that kind of combination.
So this is kind of a ridiculous slide, but I'm going to show it here anyway. So it's very, very important, obviously, coming from the mobile space, to reiterate that we do not believe that a phone UI is the same as a car UI. And I think we have to be clear that, as far as we're concerned, in many ways, never the twain should meet.
Yeah, and fundamentally, when we got started with designing Android Auto and sort of rethinking the experiences, Android Auto needed to be designed for driving. And it sounds like obvious to this crowd and to anyone here today. But as Henry mentioned, as we're coming from a heritage of mobile design and these immersive experiences where that can be your sole focus. You think about gaming, you think about media and entertainment. And we had to refocus how we thought about the UI, not only for ourselves, but also the larger organization, because it's fundamentally a supporting activity and driving is the primary activity. And so we had to design it from the ground up with that in mind.
So when we're thinking about designing these things, one of the biggest kind of hurdles, I suppose, we have to get over is distraction. And obviously, phones are known to be hugely distracting. And there are 3 different types of distraction that we deal with. So one of them is visual distraction, the other is manual, and then we have cognitive distraction. So just for those of you who aren't aware, when we're talking about visual distraction, that means I'm looking at something other than the road. I'm not looking at the road while I'm driving. I'm perhaps, I don't know, looking somewhere else. Manual distraction is my hands are fiddling around with something else, and they're not on the steering wheel. So that can be even doing things like changing the HVAC or tuning the radio. Those are classified as manual distraction. And then for me, I think the most important or most interesting thing is cognitive distraction. So cognitive distraction is when we're thinking about something other than the act of driving. And a good example of this is perhaps, to use, a mobile phone analogy, is if you have your mobile phone and you're switching applications, we can easily understand that the phone is unloading one application while, and then reloading another application, and that takes time. And actually, it turns out that mentally or cognitively, the same thing is happening, and that we're unloading one kind of mental model of how an application works, and then reloading another mental model. And that takes time, and that's time that you're not actively driving, which is a bit of a concern.
So as we alluded to earlier, we had to fundamentally rethink what it meant to have an Android-based system in the vehicle and really rethink these underlying patterns, because sort of the worst thing we could have done is taken a phone UI full of its attention-grabbing things and its patterns, its cognitive distraction, and just slam that into a dash and call it done and ship the product.
Brilliant idea. Okay. Yeah.
We really wanted to look at not only how we rethink it, but also leverage the great work that goes into designing cockpit experiences and in-vehicle experiences today, which are really about biasing towards action and bringing content and action to the forefront. So you're not digging through lists, you're not browsing through content, which is very much a mobile paradigm. You open up your entertainment app, you browse a bunch of categories, and all of that needed to be rethought and sort of turned on its head as we brought Android into the vehicle, and we could leverage these existing patterns that were already there.
So as Evan mentioned, we want to create very non-hierarchical systems. We want to create flat systems that are as simple and predictable as possible. This is really important. Again, let's just to reiterate, we're not dealing with a primary activity. We're dealing with a secondary activity. So it just needs to happen in a very, for the user, it almost needs to be second nature.
And it kind of goes without saying that also as we're rethinking those sort of fundamental interaction patterns, we're also thinking deeply about typography, glanceability, legibility, the human factors in the car, and the unique contrast environments that you just don't have to deal with in a mobile device or a design environment. And that all kind of went into how we thought about Android Auto as a different space.
Yeah, actually just the image in the background is some of the contrast studies we do. We have to do huge amounts of work for these things. It's not necessarily apparent in the final product. And one of the other things, so this is kind of like an internal mantra, I suppose, we have within the design studio, is that we always talk about things internally being knowable and familiar. So we kind of talked about how things have to be simple and predictable, and we can see that working on an application scale, right? But we're not just creating applications, we're creating an entire platform. And we wanted the entire platform to be knowable and familiar. And I mentioned earlier this kind of idea that as you're switching applications, that there's cognitive load because of you're changing mental models. So internally, we started thinking about, well, what if we could create one mental model that could be applicable to the whole system? So the mental model for navigation, or the mental model for communication, or the mental model for music and entertainment, or any other application could be articulated and expressed in the same way. So this is the knowable, familiar kind of thing. And I'm just going to show a few sketches that we made kind of earlier on. So this one's for Google Play Music, and we did some sketches for other kind of like no-name kind of whatever kind of music applications. And as you can see, as I kind of click through, you can always see the play buttons in exactly the same place. And also, you can see that the next track is in exactly the same place, even though they're different applications. And you can see that this one has thumbs up and thumbs down. And if another application came in with thumbs up and thumbs down, we try to make sure that they're put in the same place as well, so that from a driver's perspective, they really don't have to think about these different kind of mental models. They can just use the system in the way that they already know.
In addition to becoming sort of that knowable, familiar across applications, we also wanted to think about how it didn't feel like we were taking a digital or a mobile-first experience and just kind of bolting it on top of the in-vehicle HMI. And so we wanted to build something that was naturally integrated into the hardware controls of the cockpit, because that's really an environment that has already been designed for driving, and users and drivers are already going to be familiar with. And so we wanted to leverage that environment and truly build it into an integrated experience.
Yeah, so as well as thinking about an integrated experience, one of the challenges for us is that, basically nearly every single kind of car interior is completely different from the other. And that includes the hardware input systems that we have to adapt to. So here you can see, I think this is my finger touching a touch screen to select an item, right? But I could just as easily be using a rotary controller or a 5-way input or a touchpad. And we have to make sure that we can adapt our system, that it works equally well across all of those different things. And that was also an enormous challenge, trying to create one system that works with all the different input types was very difficult.
And part of that is because as Android, it's part of our DNA to enable sort of the landscape and OEMs to differentiate and innovate in the space. And one of the most exciting things to me about automotive is that unlike mobile phones or TVs, which have sort of started to homogenize on a form factor, there's an incredible amount of diversity in the automotive design environment for interior design and the HMI, heads-up displays, input-output devices. And we want to really not just work with that, but actually sort of amplify that and enable that, because we think that's an exciting space for brand and for consumer value in that environment and for automotive.
Yeah, so we're really interested in celebrating the difference between all of the different manufacturers and their cars, right? But at the same time, we have to think about the developer. And when we're thinking about the developer, it's important that we kind of guarantee some basic kind of standard or some kind of representation, consistent representation of their application within our platform. So there has to be some elements of commonality. There has to be some pillars of the system. So we have to be both adaptable and we have to be common at the same time.
And this sort of goes, again, without saying in an automotive context, but we really wanted to be grounded in research and data and test everything. And this is very different than the needs of mobile, where the distraction considerations are not there. And we want, whether it's simulator testing, occlusion testing, or the more sort of future-looking cognitive load testing, we really grounded all of our principles and validated the designs that we're doing in testing and iteration and those kinds of things.
Yeah, so this is Joey. This is the least ridiculous thing that we had to put on his face. But yeah. And I think also from a design process, it's kind of really interesting because we're doing so much testing, much more than we normally would. It creates a highly iterative process where we just basically testing and designing and testing again and designing and refining and refining and refining every single day. And I think what's kind of interesting is we can see that it's iterative on this kind of micro scale, but also we're at the beginning of this journey, right? So the connected car is just starting to come out into the world. It's just starting to become something. And we can see that that the industry as a whole will also start to have this kind of iterative process as well.
One of the other things that we really like about automotive is that, as designers, often putting some constraints around the problem allows for even more creativity and innovation. And the vehicle, unlike mobile, which is sort of a general computing platform across contexts, automotive is a really defined environment to think about as far as the roles that people play, the driver, the passengers, and also the devices that are in that environment, whether it's the passenger, the backseat entertainment, those kinds of things. And it allows for a really neat interplay and really new possibilities for the future of design and user experience.
Yeah. So we've talked about how we've looked at the in-cabin kind of user experience. But I think also for us, it's really important to remember that this is an interactive system sitting inside of a car, and a car exists at an architectural and infrastructure-based scale. And I think that as we start to project forward and we start to think about the coming future, we can start to imagine that some of those applications will perhaps exist not just within the car and entertainment or HVAC kind of scale or just be phone UIs in the car, but actually that we can start to think of those kind of applications existing or changing infrastructure. And so throughout history, every time there's been a change in transportation, there has been a change in architecture and infrastructure as well. And of course, right now we're in LA, and perhaps that's got, that is the greatest evidence we could possibly have of that, right? So I think there's going to be a huge amount of change within the space.
And one of the most exciting parts about being in this space right now is that as cars are becoming first-class digital citizens of the ecosystem, they're sort of becoming a thing unto themselves. Unlike, in previous iterations where maybe you're bringing in other models and just sort of applying them to the car, it's becoming deeply connected and more fundamentally connected, and that means that we're building new authentic experiences for that environment rather than applying old ones. And it's actually, I think, going to have a fundamental effect on the design and the thinking of those other systems, right? Mobile design first was applying desktop design to it, but then mobile design became a thing unto itself, and that had an impact on the larger environment. And we think automotive, because of its unique constraints, is really poised to have that type of impact on the rest of computing more broadly.
Yeah. I think also, this is our last slide, but I think it's important also for us to say, I mean, we work for Google, and we kind of live in Silicon Valley, and the future, is something that we talk about all the time and every day. But I think it's also really important for us to recognize that actually the automotive industry has been thinking about the future for a lot longer than us. And one of the things that's really exciting about working on this project and working with cars is that when you buy a car, from a consumer's perspective, you're always getting a little bit of tomorrow today. And so with that, I would like to say thank you very much.
Thanks.
And yeah, it was a privilege being here. Thank you.